Picture this. The aircraft is perfectly serviceable. The weather, completely clear. The crew is highly experienced. And yet somehow they fly their plane directly into the ground. So what gives? Why does a perfectly capable crew crash a perfectly capable airplane on an absolutely beautiful day?
Well, the answer is spatial disorientation. Basically, the pilot's senses told him he was flying wings level and climbing, but reality was a whole different story. He was actually in a descending spiral. His body lied. The instruments told the truth, but he trusted his physical senses over his panel. Now, if this explainer changes how you think about your own physiology and decision-making in the cockpit, hit that like button. Oh, and make sure you subscribe to Captain Aero and hit the bell icon for your universal aviation theory.
Okay, let's dive right into human factors. This is the study of how our own human performance and limitations affect aviation safety. We're looking at both physiology and psychology here. Now, you know this material is heavily examined in theory tests across the globe, right? But honestly, more importantly, this is the stuff that turns textbook knowledge into literal, real-world survival. Let's start with our first major physiological threat, hypoxia. By definition, it's just an oxygen deficiency in your body's tissues. But here is the most insidious, terrifying aspect of hypoxia. It impairs your judgment way before it impairs your consciousness. Seriously, you might actually feel totally fine. You might even feel a little euphoric. But meanwhile, your coordination is tanking. You're developing cyanosis, which is that bluing of the lips and fingernails, and your peripheral vision is slowly collapsing into tunnel vision. Your decision-making is completely, fatally compromised, and you won't even realize it's happening until you literally pass out.
Let's put some numbers to this and see exactly how fast this threat becomes lethal. We use something called the time of useful consciousness, or TUC. Basically, this is the time you have after hypoxia sets in before you can no longer take effective action to save yourself. So at 25,000 feet, you have a relatively generous 3 to 5 minutes, but watch what happens when we climb. At 35,000 feet, that time literally plummets to just 30 to 60 seconds. And at 40,000 feet, you have a terrifying 15 to 20 seconds. That's it. These are exact numbers you're going to see on your exams. Because your survival time vanishes so incredibly fast, supplemental oxygen is highly recommended above 10,000 feet. And for U.S. crews, it's actually legally required above 12,500 feet for flights lasting over 30 minutes.
All right, let's move to our next condition and see how it kind of complicates what we just learned. Hyperventilation. This is excessive breathing that rapidly drops the carbon dioxide levels in your blood. It's usually triggered by intense anxiety or stress in the cockpit. But here is the wild paradox that traps so many pilots. Hyperventilation causes the exact same symptoms as hypoxia. You get dizzy, your fingers start to tingle, you get confused. But the treatment? It's the exact opposite. To fix it, you have to consciously slow your breathing rate down, maybe even by breathing into a paper bag, just to build those CO2 levels back up.
So the absolutely crucial point here is knowing how to tell the difference when your life is literally on the line. I want to put you in the captain's seat right now for a quick scenario. You're flying at 18,000 feet. You notice your fingertips are starting to tingle and you feel slightly dizzy, but you are breathing completely normally. So, is this more likely to be hypoxia or hyperventilation? And how exactly would you treat each one differently? Go ahead and pause this explainer right now and drop your answer in the comments. I reply to every single comment, so let's see what you've got.
Okay, let's break down the answer. Because both conditions produce virtually identical symptoms at altitude, the key distinction really comes down to your equipment. If you're not on supplemental oxygen at altitude, you absolutely must suspect hypoxia first. Your immediate action? Get on oxygen. However, if you are already on supplemental oxygen and you're still getting those symptoms, suspect hyperventilation. In that case, your treatment is to purposefully, consciously reduce your breathing rate. Getting this diagnosis wrong can literally cost you your aircraft.
Right, now that we've covered the blood, let's talk about the brain. Spatial disorientation. Basically, this is the inability to correctly perceive your aircraft's attitude, position, or motion relative to the Earth. And it happens because of a mechanical flaw in our own bodies. Your vestibular system, specifically those semicircular canals in your inner ear that detect rotation, they actually adapt to movement after just 20 seconds of constant rotation. Think about that. If you enter a gradual sustained turn, after just 20 seconds, your brain literally stops detecting that you're turning at all.
And that biological glitch leads us to the most common form of spatial disorientation, the leans. Let's say you've been in that gradual, undetected turn we just talked about. When you finally check your artificial horizon and level the wings, your newly adapted inner ear is completely jarred. It falsely perceives that you are now entering a turn in the opposite direction.
You literally feel like you're leaning over in your seat. And the overwhelming physical instinct here is to roll the aircraft back into that fatal original turn just to feel level again.
If you do succumb to the leans, you are at a massive risk of entering a graveyard spiral. This is an absolutely terrifying situation. The aircraft enters a descending turn that just progressively tightens. As the spiral gets tighter, the pilot feels the back pressure needed to maintain altitude as standard G-force, instead of recognizing it as a severe bank angle. So, instinctively, the pilot pulls straight back on the yoke instead of leveling the wings. And guess what? This only tightens the spiral further, heavily accelerating the descent. The only way to survive a graveyard spiral is to absolutely and completely trust your instruments over what your screaming body is telling you.
But it's not just your inner ear that deceives you. Environmental factors play some wild tricks on your eyes, too. Just look at these false visual cues on approach. An upsloping runway will actually appear longer than it really is, which systematically tricks your brain into thinking you're higher than you actually are. The result? You fly way too low. Conversely, a downsloping runway appears shorter, making you fly too high. Rain on the windscreen? That reduces your apparent speed, making you fly too fast. And then there's the black hole approach, flying into featureless terrain at night. With zero visual references, pilots naturally tend to fly dangerously low approach angles.
Because our senses are so easily fooled, aviation theory provides us with structured frameworks to guide our psychological decision-making under stress. And this is exactly where the DECIDE model comes in. It's a lifesaver. First, you detect a change in your environment. Then you estimate just how significant that change really is before you choose a desired outcome. Once you know exactly where you want to be, you identify the necessary actions to get there, actually do the action, and finally evaluate the result. By following this flowing thought process, you basically stop yourself from making panicked, instinct-driven errors based on false sensory information.
Without a structured decision model like that, you are incredibly vulnerable to psychological traps, things like get-there-itis, which is formally known as continuation bias. This is that overwhelming, stubborn urge to continue a planned course of action, even when you're getting new, critical information telling you to change your plan. You just want to get to your destination. You just want to get home. It sounds incredibly simple, right? But I need you to understand this. This single psychological trap is one of the most common contributing factors in fatal general aviation accidents worldwide. It's a huge deal.
And frankly, all of these factors, from recognizing hypoxia to avoiding continuation bias, are severely compromised by fatigue. Whether it's acute fatigue from one really intense flight or chronic fatigue built up over weeks, it absolutely destroys your judgment, your reaction time, and your short-term memory. But here's the craziest, most dangerous aspect. Fatigue actually impairs your ability to recognize fatigue. Your own self-assessment of how tired you are is completely unreliable. And honestly, this is exactly why minimum rest requirements are so heavily regulated for commercial crews. So there we have it. We've covered the physiology and the psychology that keep you safe up in the sky. Remember our deal from the start. If this explainer changed how you think about the subtle euphoria of hypoxia, the terrifying deception of the leans, or the quiet trap of get-there-itis, make sure you hit that like button. But before you head out, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Out of everything we just went over, which human factor do you personally think is the most dangerous in real-world flying? Is it spatial disorientation, hypoxia, or decision-making errors like get-there-itis? I want real discussion only. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.